Jewish eschatological vision. But both of them are seen to be out of history. Okay? What is history, right? She says, okay, after strife and eventfulness has changed, the premise is that once perfection has arrived, change is no longer necessary. The idea of perfection is also why people believe in saving, in going home, and in activism as crisis response rather than an everyday practice. And she is extremely critical in the book about what she calls, again, I would be very interested to know what she thinks about the pro-Palestinian movement. I actually looked her up at the moment and saw what she was writing about. She never, ever, ever writes about the pro-Palestinian movement at all. So I would be interested because she is very much against these kind of eruptions of, you know, movements that like come for a minute, think they're going to change the world and then kind of disappear. She says that is not where activism lies. Activism lies in a sense, in a practice. Activism lies also, and this is really the key, and this takes us immediately onto Rabbi Sacks. Activism starts really with the self. How do we, with character formation, right? It's not just about going and holding a banner. It's about what is my posture vis-a-vis the world around me, right? How do I approach the world? And it begins with a certain posture, what she calls the posture of hope, the orientation of the spirit. And orientation of the spirit, again, is that you cannot have an orientation of the spirit if you don't believe in something above the I, above the self. Spirit, by its very definition, okay, especially if you look at the ancients, how they define spirit. Spirit is something that lies behind or beneath the surface. Spirit is something that is a spirit of the world, lies above or beneath the surface of the world. The spirit of the individual lies beneath the individual, meaning it's something that you can only see and you can only intuit if you look beyond the given. Okay, so we go back to this idea of gratitude, of awe. All of these ideas we've been speaking about, they are all predicated on the notion of something lying beyond the immediacy of our senses. Beyond the immediacy of our senses lies something that we perhaps can't intuit unless we open our eyes, unless we have this orientation of spirit. And I want to move now to Rabbi Sacks's book, To Heal a Fractured World, which again is a fascinating book. It's really one of his most important books. And in that book, Rabbi Sacks, it speaks very beautifully. In fact, I've actually got it here in Hebrew because I'm teaching in Hebrew in the next class. But he speaks there about this idea of what is the Jewish vision, what is the Jewish mission, and obviously he speaks about this idea of tikkun olam. Okay, this idea of healing a fractured world, that one of the Jewish missions is to heal the fractured world. But he, like Rebecca Sonnet, he does not believe that Judaism is about revolutionary movements. He doesn't even believe that Judaism is about reaching a utopia, because he says, as we've seen throughout history, that when we search for that utopia, when we try and get to that utopia in revolutionary ways and not in incremental ways, very often it will come at the sacrifice of the individual, of individual dignity, as we know, okay, and many other things. So Rabbi Sacks says like this. He says that in order to follow this vision of tikkun olam, of the idea of healing a fractured world, we have to have hope. What is Jewish hope? And I'm going to share with you what he says. He says, despair is not a Jewish emotion. Behind the ethic of responsibility is the daring idea that more than we have faith in God, God has faith in us, okay? And again, I want to just stop here for a second, because if you remember, I said last week, and I again said it this week, that the Bible was a theological revolution, but even more so an anthropological revolution. And the anthropological revolution of the Bible is what we say every single morning when we wake up, and we say, Rabba emunatecha is essentially, great is your faith in me, not my faith in you, right? Which is why Rabbi Avraham Yeshua Heschel, when he calls his book, he doesn't call his book Man in Search of God. He calls his book God in Search of Man. Because he says that if we as human beings recognize that God is calling out to us, Ayeka, where are you? Right? All the time, God is calling out to us. Why? Because he is asking us to partner with him in rectifying the brokenness of the world. But we can only partner with him if we've opened ourselves up to hearing God. We won't hear God calling out to him. We won't see God we won't be awed by the world around us unless we recognize that there is something that lies under the surface the given surface of reality. And that is the spirit. And that is what Rabbi Sacks is saying. God believes in us. God believes in our ability to change the world. But it's got to begin with the individual. It's got to begin by us working on our character, by us recognizing that we have to be in this movement of moving towards a vision, of seeking a vision, but at the same time of surrendering to the idea that there's certain things that are beyond us. Okay, and he says, despite his frequent disappointments, he does not give up on us and never will. This is what hope is in Judaism: a refusal to give up on your deepest ideals, but a refusal likewise to stay in a world still disfigured by evil, that the Messiah has yet to come and that the world is saved. There is still work to be done. The journey is not yet complete, and it depends on us. We who now all too briefly stride upon the stage of time. The Bible is not, and this is the key, the Bible is not a metaphysical opium, but its opposite. There's many people that Rabbi Sacks is in dialogue throughout his books with, and one of the people that he's in dialogue very, very often is Karl Marx. Specifically in this book, Karl Marx denigrated religion and said religion is the opium of the masses. Meaning, what did Karl Marx mean when he said that? He essentially said that religion is a way to numb us to the pain of the world so that we can live happily and we don't need to do anything in order to make the world better. Karl Marx says if we take religion away, we'll feel the pain of the world. We'll see actually the world isn't how I want it to be. And then we'll work in a revolutionary way in order to create a utopia. That was Karl Marx understanding that's the basis of his Marxist theology, his Marxist ideology, okay? And Rabbi Sacks comes out against Karl Marx and says, no, that is not what religion is about. Religion is not an opium. Religion doesn't say to us, oh, everything's going to be okay. There are some religions that do that, but Judaism isn't that, and the Bible certainly isn't that. The Bible begins, as Rabbi Sacks, in protest against the world as it is. Okay, Rabbi Sacks says if you look at all the great people in the Bible, they all protested against God. They all said to God, what are you doing? Abraham says to God, will the judge of the whole world not do justice? Right, arguing with God. Moshe argues with God. Yirmiyahu argues with God. Gideon argues with God. Everyone argues with God against the justice or the seeming justice of the world as it is, and says we are not accepting the world as it is. And so Rabbi Sacks says the Bible is not metaphysical opium. Rather, its aim is not to transport the believer to a private heaven. Instead, it is the impassioned, sustained desire to bring heaven down to earth. Until we have done this, there is work still to do. Optimism and hope are not the same. Optimism is the belief that the world is changing for the better. Hope is the belief that together we can make the world better. Okay, meaning there is a difference, and this is a very, very famous line of Rabbi Sacks, which he says many, many times, and which is used as a very nice soundbite through the legacy very, very often. Okay, but the truth is, it's not just a soundbite. It's not just a very nice kind of idea. It is actually the basis, the foundation of Rabbi Sacks' thinking, because what he essentially is saying here is that Judaism is a religion that does not allow us to simply kind of rest on our laurels, to say, as Karl Marx does, oh, it's okay, don't worry, God will save you, or to say, oh, we're going to save the world through revolutionary terms. No, he says like this: optimism is a passive virtue, hope is an active one. And again, it echoes what Rebecca Solnit says. It needs no courage to be an optimist, but it takes a great deal of courage to hope. The Hebrew Bible is not an optimistic book. It is, however, one of the great literatures of hope. And I really, really think that what Rabbi Sacks says here, and what he says throughout the book, is that Judaism would not have existed over 3,000 years, or 2,000 years at least, in exile, without this Jewish conception of tikva, of hope. Okay, and now what I want to show you is, by the way, I've thrown in here a few songs that I wanted to put on for you. But because our time is so limited, what I'm going to do is once in a while, I will put a song on for you here, because I like to do that. But what I will do is once everyone's signed up after this week, we'll have a group. Matan creates a WhatsApp group, and what I'll do is I will communicate with you. In any case, the WhatsApp group is very important for me, because often I'll mention articles, or I'll mention something, or a podcast of this, which I'll send on to the group. But one thing I will do also is I will send the songs that are related, what I think are related to our course, onto the group, so that you can watch them in your own time. I'll try and send also the link to the English translation of the words, which is, and it also means less printing. I'd have to print them out for you, okay? Onto the group. One of the songs that, I mean, some of you might know this song, Adi Abrahami, she's amazing. I don't know if anyone have you ever come across her. She's like, I think, a very actually undervalued Israeli singer. She's young, gorgeous, and amazing voice. And she sings a song that my daughter literally listens to on a loop in my car, which is called Ze Matril B'Tzad. Ze Matril B'Tzad. It starts with one step. Ze Matril B'Tzad, Ze Matril B'Dimyon, and it starts with imagination. Ze Matril, I can't remember every single one. You've got to listen to it. Firstly, it's a beautiful song. And secondly, the whole idea behind the song is the idea that we can change the world through step-by-step, incremental steps toward change. And it actually, she says exactly these two movements that I spoke about. The idea of having a vision, right? It begins with imagination, with a vision, but it also begins with this idea of step by step. And she speaks about this notion of belief, right? And she says that very often fear stops us, fear prevents us from taking those steps, from moving towards the vision. And listen to the song. It's a really, really beautiful song. And she has another amazing song called Vihi Sha'amda, which I think we'll try and get to another time. The video is also amazing, where it's called Vihi Sha'amda, which is like from Pesach, Vihi Sha'amda the Tefillah, but she talks about the women. In fact, I'll bring it for you when we do the women of the Exodus, okay? And she uses the words from Vihi Sha'amda, like Vihi Sha'amda is that the promise stood, right? That's what it translates in the Haggadah. But she takes it to be Vihi Sha'amda, she stood. And it's amazing. Mamash, you should see, it's so beautiful. That one I'll definitely play, because I want you to also see the video and everything. She's a beautiful singer, and it really, every time I listen to this song when I'm in the car, which is, very often with my daughter, my 9-year-old, and she's singing along, and I'm like, thank God that these are the people she's listening to, that this is the kind of inspiration that she gets, that she can hear these words, that I don't know if she truly understands what it means, but there's such a deep theological message in the song as well. Okay, I now want to move us to hope hermeneutics. Very big words, very kind of intellectual, yes, very academic. Hermeneutics is simply the study of language, okay, the study of text, right? And what I believe is that the biblical narrative and generally Jewish texts, okay, are predicated, the interpretive gesture of Judaism is predicated on the idea of hope. This idea, this orientation that we've been speaking about, I've kind of developed for you, which is this idea of seeing beyond the given. Okay, if we think about what the oral law is, if we think about all of these books on the shelf here, what are they doing? They are looking beyond the given in the text. Okay, we have a text in front of us, Torah Shebichtav, and what the oral law does, what the interpreters, what the, many, many centuries of interpretive Judaism is essentially to dig down deep, okay? And we know, for example, we have different levels of reading a text. We have Pshat, which is the basic level. Then you have Drash, which is the homiletical level, okay? You have Sod, which is the secret level. There's different levels of reading the text. And this, to me, is exactly, it kind of, it sits side by side with this idea of Tikvah, okay, this idea of seeing beyond the given. And I want to read with you, I want to begin with Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg, one of my favorite biblical scholars, I would say, together with Leon Kass, who I also am going to bring a lot. The two of them, in my mind, are the top biblical scholars of our generation. Aviva's writing it's wow on every level. It requires study, meaning you can't just pick the book up. Like I would say someone like Erica Brown, who I also really, really love. Someone like Erica Brown is very accessible. You can pick it up, you can read it, you can get to it, it's fine. Aviva Zornberg, I mean, really, I could do a whole course just studying her interpretations, okay? Because many of her things require, number one, you really require not a kind of background knowledge to philosophy, psychology, okay, many, many different things. And very often one has to read the sentence 3 or 4 times before one can really grasp what she's saying, okay? And And it's fascinating to me that when she speaks about, in a minute I'm going to read to you, what she speaks about is the way in which she approaches the text. And it really is this idea, in my mind, okay, it's this idea of hope, of really recognizing that the text holds a myriad of possibilities, right, that are standing there in the text in front of us, and all we need to do is enter into it. All we need to do is to act on the interpretive gesture, right? This is what she says. She says, Moses, she speaks about the difference between Moshe and Aaron. Moses, more questioning, more restless, is also a better reader than his brother. He is not entranced by the words of the text, but senses what is hidden in the spaces between the letters, in the silences between the words. I'm going to stop here. If you remember right at the beginning of the course, I said to you that words betray. Okay, remember I said to you, like one of my, I'm trying to think of the right word, fears about being a teacher generally, but certainly about teaching this kind of stuff, is that I'm going to betray someone's experience through my words, because words are concrete, words are order, words are the way in which we, make a stand in the world. But she says that one of the beauties of the biblical text is that there are silences, and that there are gaps between the words, and even those teach us so much. What is hidden is essentially the reader's most intimate life, the things and words of the night, fears and longings and questionings. It is these that I have tried, and this is the way that she reads it, to hear from within the text of the Torah. Ultimately, the interpretive act becomes similar to the creative one. One reads and one begins to hear a certain hum in one's ear. The hum in the ears of the reader generates a personal response to the text. There are, of course, decorums and limits to be observed. And again, to go back to this idea of, on the one hand, submitting myself, being subservient in a way to the tradition or to our reality, right? And saying there's some things I have to let go and be beyond my control, and I have to keep within the boundaries. And at the same time, being a person of agency and being a person of imagination, right? But the intimate encounter between self and text must create something neither stale nor shabby, in Wallace Stevens' words, but with the essential thisness, which is the classic midrashic description of what it is to receive the Torah. On this very day, they entered the wilderness of Sinai. Torah should be new to you, as if they were given to you on this very day. Now, again, way beyond the scope of this year, but when I taught Sefer Bamidbar, one of the ways we introduced the course was we spoke about the Torah being given in the Midbar, which we know there's a plethora of midrashim about the idea of the Torah. Why is the Torah given in the Midbar? And one of the things we really spoke about is this idea of the text as a liminal space, as this in-between space. Why is the text given to us, and why is the Torah given to us in the Midbar? Because we need to open ourselves up. We need to make ourselves vulnerable to the text in the same way that the text is vulnerable to our interpretive gesture. This notion of vulnerability breaks down boundaries, breaks down the borders, and allows us to have a real, true relationship, right? To bring in someone totally different, Lahavdil, right? And Brene Brown, where she's a very popular psychologist in America, when she speaks about the idea, she did all of her psychology research was on the idea of vulnerability. And she said that without vulnerability, there can be no authentic relationship, right? Because vulnerability, when I open myself up, I have to tear down the borders, tear down the boundaries, open myself up to the other person. But only when I do that can there be an essential, authentic relationship. In the same way with the text, when we open ourselves up to the text, which is essentially to be in the midbar, to be in the wilderness, to be vulnerable, both to the text and the text to us, it allows for a relationship. Now, is there a danger? Of course there's a danger. There's a danger that the text can get hurt, and there's a danger that we can get hurt by the text. Now, many Jewish people say, I don't understand, the Bible is ridiculous, right? It has these ridiculous laws and these ridiculous things, and all the various, things that don't sit comfortably with us, okay? Whether it's the way in which we went into the land and slaughtered the nations, whether it's homosexuality, whether it's the idea of Ben Soreh or Moreh, whatever it is, whatever you choose, take your pick, okay? It doesn't speak to me, okay? And I'm not comfortable with it, and it's you know, too stringent or whatever it happens to be. Yes, there's a danger when we open ourselves up to a true, authentic relationship where the person is vulnerable and the text is vulnerable. We're going to find things that don't sit comfortably. But does that mean that we need to let go of the relationship? Not necessarily. It means that we have to find ways in order to allow each of those things, the text and ourselves, to exist as it is, but to find a way to approach it that perhaps is slightly different. Leon Kass is a brilliant biblical scholar. There's a whole backstory to him, which I'm not going to tell today because I want to jump straight into the text. But he speaks about this idea that, again, this idea of the Bible being not just a theological but anthropological shift. And he speaks about this idea that the reader, when the reader interprets, he makes the Torah his own. And that is really, again, what Aviva Zornberg speaks about, this idea of Kabbalat HaTorah. What does it mean to have Kabbalat Torah? It literally means to accept the text, to take the text. So he says, I almost never use later passages to explicate earlier ones, although I may point out how a present episode or a novel expression intelligible of its own is also pregnant with future possibilities. Again, so what Leon Kass does, he explaining at the beginning of his book, Reading Exodus, how he approaches text, and he essentially says he takes the text and he reads it as it is, meaning he tries not to think about what comes before and comes after. I try to exclude concepts, even worthy ones, that are foreign to the text, which is hardest to do when they are part of the way I normally see the world. Okay, so again, coming to the text through the prism of the wilderness, right? Letting go of all my previous preconceptions and literally coming and approaching the text as is. Okay, again, if we go back to the idea of becoming, remember we spoke about this notion of becoming, you want to see the text as a text that is becoming, not just a text that is, not just a text that is being, but a text that is becoming. If I'm to learn from text, however, I cannot find only what I have unthinkingly inserted by way of question or answer. I am acutely aware of the great danger that hangs over all efforts at interpretation, that one will find in the text not what the author intended, but only what one has put there oneself. And again, this is what I said to you, this is what the danger is, okay? For these reasons, a philosophical reading of Exodus must proceed with great modesty and caution, not to say fear and trembling, okay? And again, we're going to come back to this. One of the ideas that we're going to be unpacking in this course this year is we're going to be looking at the Sefer Iyov, the book of Job, and the Akedah. And in the comparison between the two of them, one of the themes that I want to pick up on is the theme of Yirat Elokim. The theme of Yirat Elokim, which literally translates as fear of God. But we're going to connect it to this idea because it's far more than just fear. It's this idea of awe. And when one approaches the world, but certainly when one approaches the Torah from a posture of awe, okay, it will allow us, because awe is humbling. So we approach the text always in a posture of humility and not arrogance. And when we do that, that's when we really are able to feel and intuit some things in the text which perhaps we are not come immediately to our eyes. And he says, I now believe that the text has been written not merely to inform the reader about narrated events. It has been written mainly to form him. Not just to inform us, but to form us, to educate him. Not only by means of explicit content and dramatic enactments, but also and especially by the ways in which it manages to draw him into the orbit. Okay, and this is exactly what we're trying to do. The text draws us into it. The book aims not just to teach about, but to be lived with. Precisely through its manner of writing and its need for interpretation and reinterpretation, it causes the reader to enter into its content and make the book his own. Okay? So we literally enter into it. We should enter sympathetically into it and inhabit the hearts and minds of all the characters, including those who initially repel us. With some effort of imagination and sympathy, we can live with Moses at the burning bush, with Pharaoh during the plagues, with the people backed against the sea of the reeds, appearing Decalogue of Mount Sinai, with Moses on the mountain, with Aaron the gold calf, the people bring gifts at the tabernacle. We can try to understand them as they understand themselves. In short, I have come to regard myself as an integral participant of the book. I am not a character in the story, but my vicarious participation is required for the text to come fully to life. Will someone just remind me that I've dropped an earring that I need to find afterwards. I don't know where it's gone to. Someone just remind me, I'm going to forget. One of the things that we do that we should do ultimately when we read the Bible, because the Bible is not just law, the Bible is narrative. And one of the things that we should do when we read the Tanakh is literally to enter into it, to imagine ourselves. Now, one of the stories where I find that really one of the stories that is the easiest to do is the story of Yosef, which we're going to get to. Okay, and one of the songs I brought for you, again, it's written here, it's Hanan Ben Ari. I'm sure many of you know this song. This is a much more well-known song. Chalom Kamo Yosef, Chalom Kamo Yosef, right? To dream like Yosef, where he basically, again, I'll send it on the group, and perhaps we'll do it before we enter into the Yosef stories. But essentially what Hanan Ben Ari, who's a very famous Israeli singer, he does is he goes through all of the Tanakh, many of the characters in Tanakh, and he speaks about the idea that we need to enter into their stories. Like, we need to be a part of the story, right? And he says, I want to be like Miriam, and I want to be like Yosef, and I want to, the song is very, very beautiful. So again, that's really what Leon Cass is saying to us here, is that when we are able to open ourselves up, and again, this is this idea of hope, of seeing beyond the surface, it allows us to enter into it. What's interesting to me, and here I'm also deliberating whether to bring this or to skip it, because we are going to have to skip a few things, but I do want to bring it because I think it's really important. Avraham Yeshua Heschel has an enormous book. Rabbi Avraham Yeshua Heschel has an enormous book. It's about this big. I have it on my shelf, and it's called Heavenly Torahs Refracted Through the Generations. And in that, he basically goes through the way in which we read the Torah. Okay? And he brings many different paradigms, many different ways of understanding the way in which we read the Torah. It's a really, really unbelievable work. Phenomenal work. One of the things he begins with is he talks about two different paradigms of Jewish interpretation. One is a paradigm of Rabbi Ishmael, and one is a paradigm of Rabbi Akiva. Okay, and he says they also represent two different ways of seeing the world. And what's fascinating is that actually Rabbi Ishmael in his day was more prolific and more profound even, and maybe even more learned than Rabbi Akiva. But the person who has become the icon, really the kind of characterizes Torah Sheba'al Peh, is who? Rabbi Akiva. And the question is why? Why is it that in legacy making, okay, reminds me of Hamilton, who lives, who dies, who tells your story, right? Who is it that ended up telling the story of Torah Sheba'al Peh in the consciousness of our minds, right? The Jewish people, the rest of history, is Rabbi Akiva. And Avraham Yeshua Heschel is curious to find out why is it that Rabbi Akiva becomes the quintessential character of Torah Sheba'al Peh. Listen to what he speaks about, because this really can, by seeing this, by understanding this, it draws us back to the idea of hope as hermeneutic. Okay, that the entire Torah Sheba'al Peh is oriented towards a posture of hope. Who is the person that characterizes hope more than anybody else in Talmudic literature? Rabbi Akiva. Okay, and so I don't think I'm making this up. Okay, I don't think I'm making up the idea of hermeneutic hope as being the basis of Jewish interpretation, because in the consciousness, even in our subconsciousness, Rabbi Akiva is the person who represents the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And Rabbi Akiva is the person who represents Jewish hope. And so the two of them are juxtaposed constantly. And what does that juxtaposition tell us? Now I want to enter into Avraham Yeshua Heschel. Avraham Yeshua Heschel says like this. He says, each generation has its exegetus. The Torah itself can be acquired in two different ways. I've cut and pasted. I mean, I could have literally bought you two chapters, okay? Because there was so much there. It was really, the work, by the way, the biggest challenge for me as a teacher, the biggest challenge is to try and make my source sheet less than 8 pages. Okay, no joking. It's like physically painful for me. I'm not kidding you. It's physically painful for me to cut my sauces. Like I find it very, very, very difficult. And one of the things specifically in this sauce, everything I read, I was like, no, I need to bring this. No, I need to bring this. And I think I spent about 3 hours just trying to find the right part that I was going to bring you. And it's definitely, definitely not representative of the whole chapter, 2 chapters. Again, like that's why I have my reading course on Thursday mornings, because I have my group of 30 people, because we cut it at 30, who put up with my not having to cut things. So we read the whole book, okay? But let me, so this is what I'm telling you, it's kind of a, what would I say? It's a tamsit, it's like a very small essence of a much bigger story that he's telling, but I've tried my best to try and get to the part that I want to bring. So he says like this: the Torah itself can be acquired in 2 different ways, via the road of reason or via the road of vision, okay? Reason and vision, and we need both. We need both. We need the Torah of Rabbi Ishmael and we need the Torah of Rabbi Akiva. But listen, Rabbi Ishmael's path was that of the surface, plain meaning of the text. Rabbi Akiva's path was that of the esoteric meaning, okay? Meaning the meaning that lies behind the text. Okay, the nation harbored treasures of thought, and Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva served as mouthpieces for voices and echoes of generations that preceded them. Rabbi Akiva could be credited with seeking out the wondrous. Again, I remind you, what is tikva predicated on? Awe, gratitude, wonder. Wonder is another good word. Okay, Rabbi Ishmael could be credited with shunning the wondrous. Why? Because Rabbi Ishmael was a logician. He was a rationalist. And again, rationalism is very, very much part also of our legacy, okay? Rambam, many people. We don't need to say all of them. He shook no structural beams, neither did he impose his authority on the text. Among his good quality was a level-headed caution. Better in his eyes was a single measure of reflection on what is written and given than massive speculation above and beyond to the very limits of apprehension. Okay, so Rabbi Ishmael is very much what we might call the Brisker method, right? Very much this idea of the rational, very much this idea of what is given in front of us. What do we have to work with, right? And what does our mind, our reason tell us about what is in front of us? But Rabbi Akiva's teaching sought to penetrate to inner depths with profundity and potency of language. He did not shrink from anthropomorphism, okay, which is when God's described in human terms, but rather he preserved the concrete in scripture, cherished imaginative meanings, added metaphorical embellishments, and created images of the supernal world. Okay, so what does he do here? He wasn't like Hillel, he was like Hillel rather than Shammai. Okay, Shammai taught, Shammai would, if someone came to Shammai who didn't have wisdom, what would he say? Go away. Okay, Hillel taught everybody. Hillel's personality saw beyond the given. Okay, and so did Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva saw the unlocked possibility in every person and in every circumstance, right? And then he continues, Rabbi Akiva too opened his school door wide, okay? It was characteristic for him to encourage and to influence many. He would expound and sermonize in public and would also teach Torah to individuals. These virtues, unbounded strength that overflowed its banks, courage and the desire and effort to raise up many disciplines were not the primary virtues of Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Ishmael approached his teaching warily and made determination uneasily. His chief concern was to learn Torah in an enduring way, as if he were never certain that his teachings were firm or that his learning was secure. Such doubts were far from Rabbi Akiva's heart. His chief concern was to raise up disciples. And again, I go back to this idea of vulnerability. If we think about Rabbi Akiva's life, Rabbi Akiva, it's unbelievable if you think about it. He lost all of his students. And yet he began again, okay? He was somebody that did not allow loss to close him off to loving again, to working towards more students again. He allowed himself again and again and again to be vulnerable. And where do we see it? Where does it begin? It begins in his origin story, the origin story of the water dripping on the rock. One would say the water dripping on the rock never changes its formation. What does Rabbi Akiva says? No, you're not understanding. The rock is vulnerable to the water. If you look long enough, you'll see it, okay? He allowed himself to open himself up to seeing things beyond the surface, meaning beyond the surface reality, okay? And therefore, he allowed himself to take risk. What Rabbi Sachs speaks about all the time is that one of the things that the Bible taught us was that God takes a risk with man. Unlike the polytheistic gods who never risk having a relationship with humankind, God risks having a relationship with humankind. Because why? Because humankind can rebel, because humankind can be non-obedient, because humankind can break their relationship with God. Anyone who enters into any relationship takes a risk, makes oneself vulnerable. Rabbi Akiva made himself vulnerable in the lived sense, but he also allowed the text to be open to himself, to be vulnerable to his interpretation, and for him to be vulnerable to the text. Rabbi Akiva illuminated the world, and in every generation his fame shines as a sun rising in light. Rabbi Ishmael's fame had been fleeting and mercurial, even to the extent that Maimonides considered him to be one of Rabbi Akiva's disciples. The teachings of Rabbi Ishmael, an original creation without parallel in our ancient literature, did not penetrate into the consciousness of the generations. Only indirectly and unconsciously were many sages influenced by his mode of thought. And this is essentially what Rabbi Avraham Yeshua Heschel tells us. Rabbi Akiva becomes the motif of the Torah Sheba'al Peh because of the fact that he allows himself to be open to the text, because of the ability to see beyond the given reason, because he stood for the idea of tikva, of hope. Now, again, I didn't bring any of these stories for you, but you all know the stories. You all know the stories of Rabbi Akiva standing at the destruction of the temple and the other rabbis crying and he's laughing. And the other rabbis say to him, Akiva, why are you laughing? You look at the destruction in front of him. He says, well, if the prophecy of Yecheskel comes true, and I know that the prophecy of someone else is going to come true, the prophecy of destruction came true, so the prophecy of redemption will come true. Meaning what he's able to see is he's able, again, if I go back to what Mac Haid spoke about, what Rebecca Solin spoke about, the prison is not the place, the prison is the perspective. When I'm able to crack myself open to the possibility that there are unimagined possibilities in front of us, right? I said 2 weeks ago that, like, if someone would have come to me a year ago and said, you know what, every single one of the living hostages will be released by Hamas, I remember I met with Julie, I think I told you this, I met with Julie Kupperstein, Bar Kupperstein's mother, very, very, very early on in the war. Before, by the way, still when there were children, when all the hostages were still in Gaza. And I was like unbelievably blown away by her. She made us, I was there with the group at Hostage Square, and I actually ended up sitting down and talking to her a long time afterwards, but she made us all stand up and say Mizmola Todah. Okay, she made us say the Tehillim of Todah. She said, because we are going to thank God for Bar's release before he's released. And as it happens, this was, again, way before anyone even knew who he was. I took him on as kind of my adopted hostage, and I davened for him, and I read out a lot about him, whatever else. But I remember leaving the square, and if I'm totally honest with you, I remember leaving the square, and I remember thinking to myself, I really, really feel for this woman because she's living in cloud cuckoo land. Like, I really thought to myself, like, it's amazing. And I was awed by her emunah. But I really thought to myself, it's so simple. Like, it's so, like, I mean, doesn't she understand? Doesn't she understand? Like, it's so unlikely that all of these chassadim are going to come out alive. Like, what would, and again, we know we've had many losses along the way, but I remember thinking, like, they are going to hold hostages for years and decades. Like, there's no way. And so, like, even I could not take myself to that imagined place that she was already there. She was already there. She was Rabbi Akiva in the making. Literally, she was already in that imagined place, and she was working in that imagined place to bring that imagined place to be it. And now, with hindsight, I look back and I say, how dare you have walked away from there thinking her faith was simple? Her faith is the most profound, complex faith there is. Her faith is the faith of Rabbi Akiva. And it's just that at that moment, I hadn't made the paradigm shift to understand the profundity of these people, right? And where they're coming from, they have taught us, our generation, they have taught us what Mashiach HaRuach looks like, to bring the spirit back. And it's not a simple spirit, and it's not a kind of black and white spirit. It's something very, very complex, very profound. And this is who she was. So, and actually, what I want to do is I'm going to skip the next few things. We have like 2 or 3 minutes, and I want to take us just in these 2 or 3 minutes to the word tikva in the Torah. Where do we see the word tikva? Very simply, one of the first places we see it is in the story of, in Sefer Yoshua, the story of a Rachav, who is a harlot. When there are spies that go, before Yoshua goes to conquer the land, he sends spies into the land to go and do a reconnaissance mission. And while the spies are in the land, they basically get caught out, and they go and they are given, what's the word I'm looking for? Like they're given protection in the house of a harlot called Rachav. Okay, and Rachav gives them protection, and they basically are saved, and she lets them go out the window. And as they are leaving, she says to them, like this in source number 11, "Hinei anachnu ba'im ba'aretz et tikvat chut hasheni asher tikshru b'chalon asher hodetanu bo ve'et avich ve'et imech ve'et achich ve'et kol beit avich tosvi elecha habayita." And she says to them, "You need to help me. When you come into the land, I need you to help me." And they say to her, when we come into the land, you need to hang out the string from your window. And the string is called tikvat chut. And it's a very strange phrase, right? Tikvat chut. What is tikvat chut? And so when they come, she does that, okay? And she says, she says, Tomar kitzbrechem ken hu. Even the way that she says it, and your words shall be. Your words shall be. I keep thinking back to that encounter I had with Julie Kupstein. And that she said, Bar is going to come out, and we need to already sing a prayer. She was mamash, the women at the Exodus. That's what she was. She was the women who took their tambourines before they saw the redemption. Okay, your words will be. Now, we don't need those words. The Torah doesn't need to tell us that she tied the string. Why does it tell us? Because hope is not a passive stance. Hope is an active stance. The Torah has to tell us that she did what she told. She tied the chut. Because, yes, it's true. You need faith, and you need to have a conscience, and you need to have a spirit in order to do the right thing. And by the way, now I go back to that. Remember, right at the beginning, we spoke about this idea that Rebecca Solnit said, that this idea she said, hope is the ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. Rahab did not save these people because she thought she would get something out of it. Only afterwards, with hindsight, once they're there, she understands. Does she say, okay, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to save myself? But she does it. She did it because it was the right thing to do, right? And therefore, and again, she actively ties the chut, and then she is exactly saved. She is saved when they come, they save her. The tikvat chut is an analogy to what tikva is, to what the Jewish idea of tikva is. And the Jewish idea of tikva is the idea that we hold two things. We hold faith and belief in God. And again, if I go back to Julie Kupstein, we know that there was a phone call that was made to her. I don't know if people read this. It was in Dafke Makor Rishon, the Shabbat. They had last Shabbat with an interview with her. But there was a phone call made to her midway through the war by one of the terrorists that was holding bar. And the terrorist said to her, you need to go to the UN, and you need to do this, and you need to go, and you need to tell them to release bar and to make a ceasefire. And she said to them, She responded to the person on the phone. She said, the only person I need to have faith in is God. The only person who will release bar is God. She says, I'm doing all my work here, but it's got nothing to do with politics. I'm doing all my work here, right? And she was a yuzma. She initiated many different projects in the arena of, Shabbat and all different things. She said, and then she turned to them and she said, and you know what? Your fate's also only in the hands of God. Now, to be able to have, to have that like frame of mind, to have that kind of perspective, like to be able to like say that is takes it. So there has to be a sense of submission to something beyond myself, which is emunah, which is faith. Faith is always about something that happens outside the self. But at the same time, there also has to be the acknowledgement that God has faith in me and that I need to act. and that I need to be a partner with God in eliminating evil in this world. And how do you do that? Because if I only believe in me, that leads to arrogance, and ultimately what Nietzsche predicted, men become gods, right? Which is dangerous in and of itself. But if I only am subservient, and I only submit myself, and I only say, well, it's only about just exactly what Karl Marx says, opium of the masses, right? About saying, nothing is in my hands, I have no control, everything is, God's work. And so I'm just going to allow God to do what he needs to do. Both of those lead to a passive stance. And we know that that is not the Jewish stance. Tikva is a stance in which, on the one hand, I am oriented by my spirit, by what is good. I do what is good, not because I'm going to get a reward, but because it's good, right? But at the same time, I recognize, and because I believe in God and I believe in what he's given us, but at the same time, I also recognize that God has given me the ability to be an agent in my destiny. And here we're going to finish today. I'm going to come very, very quickly back to Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu was a king who basically was ill, and his fate was to die. And then he prays. The Navi comes in and tells him, you're going to die. And then he prays and he turns to a wall. And he prays and then he's healed. And I want to talk about that for a minute because that seems to be the opposite of what we're saying. I'm going to show you the Midrash there. But I want to just say one thing to finish. The stories of Yosef that we're going to be looking at are exactly this idea. Something happens while he is in the prison where his perspective shifts and he realizes he has to be an agent of his own destiny. He has to be an agent of his own destiny that holds belief in God in the same hand. Okay, and Yosef is the primary story of that. Okay. Thank you. I don't know where.